Hello friends, I am Arpit and I am here with today's analysis. Today is 30th of May and we're going to deal with three very important topics which are in news. First is NASA's mission to study heat emissions at poles. The name of the mission is Mission PREFIRE. Now NASA is launching two CUBE satellites known as CubeSats. One already launched and one it will be launching. The aim is to study the heat being emitted from the most coldest areas on Earth, that is the poles. You might be surprised that, we do not have any such arrangement as of now to study the heat emissions from the poles because the heat emissions from the poles are done in the far infrared domain of the electromagnetic spectrum. These CubeSats will be studying those far infrared rays, and we can come to a conclusion that how much heat is being radiated back from the Earth in a day. The difference between heat coming onto the Earth and radiating back is basically the heat budget or the temperature rise on the Earth's surface. Next is the Global Pandemic Treaty. This is under discussion since the last 2 years. COVID came, it struck, and it shook all of us. WHO realized that we do not have any such, I would say, arrangement or legally binding treaty to tackle such kind of situations, and thus there were many hurdles faced by WHO. There are rules in place which are basically for epidemics, not pandemics. Whatever happened, happened according to those rules only at that time. So it is high time now that we adopt this. Negotiations are going on, and the WHO officials have met for a week's meeting this time also. Let's be hopeful and let's be helpful that this kind of treaty gets adopted. Next is Palestine's UN membership. Although for Palestine, USA has vetoed the, I would say, proposal for it becoming a member in United Nations Security Council, but United Nations General Assembly has passed a resolution with 142 members supporting that Palestine should become a permanent member of the United Nations, including India. This passage of the resolution by the UNGA technically has no, I would say it will not convert into reality because the procedure is that UNSC has to pass it first by consensus, means there should be no veto. And then if the UNGA passes it by two-third majority, it will be a member. But since the UNSC has not passed it, there's no relevance of UNGA passing that resolution. It is just like a moral pressure being exerted on the UNSC to adopt this because more than two-thirds of the countries, around 73% of the members, that is 142 members, are demanding Palestine's involvement or Palestine's membership to the United Nations. So this is how things will be in today's class. Let's get started with the first thing, that NASA's mission to study heat emissions at the pole, mission PREFIRE. Now on May 25, NASA launched, one of the two satellites it has decided. The second satellite is yet to be launched. Okay. The purpose of this satellite is basically measure how much heat the Antarctic and Arctic, the two of the coldest regions on the Earth, radiate into space and how this influences the planet's climate. There will be these CubeSats, will be, launched, which will be launched, shoebox-sized cube satellites. They will be. The mission is named as PREFIRE, Polar Radiate Energy in the Far Infrared Experiment, and it has been jointly developed by NASA and the University of Wisconsin, Madison. So these are some certain facts about this mission PREFIRE. But yes, the purpose is to study the heat radiated back from the two coldest regions from the Earth, that is the poles. Before getting into more details about this particular experiment, let us first understand what CubeSats are. Now, CubeSats are miniature satellites. Their size is 10 centimeter into 10 centimeter into 10 centimeter. This 10 into 10 into 10 makes up 1 unit or 1 cube, just a little bigger than a Rubik's cube and weight not more than 1.33 kgs. Now, depending on the CubeSat's mission, the number of units can be 1.5, 2, 3, 6, and 12 units, according to NASA. So, if you see this figure, 1 unit, 10 centimeter, 10 centimeter, 10 centimeter, like this. 1.5 unit, 10 centimeter, 5 centimeter, 10 centimeter, 5 centimeter, 5 centimeter, like this, in 10 centimeter. 2 units, 10 into 10 into 10, 10 into 10 into 10. 3 units, like this. 6 units, like this. 12 units, like this. Now, this present, I would say, uh, mission is a 6U mission, means there are 6 CubeSats. So these satellites were first deployed. When were these first developed? These were first developed in 1999, and that was not developed for sending them in space. It was developed by California Polytechnic State University at San Luis Obispo. It is called as Cal Poly, and Stanford University. However, they were very light in weight. Though NASA found its utility in space missions also and have started deploying it in the space for research, commercial purposes, scientific purposes, or technology demonstration, whatever purposes, these purposes, these satellites have now been started to get deployed. Why researchers want to study heat emissions? See, it has to do with the heat budget, the amount of solar radiation coming in, the amount going out. If Earth is radiating less as compared to the incoming solar radiations, then there will be heat increase in the Earth's atmosphere. That is called as the energy budget of the Earth. So we want to study that energy budget, that how much heat is being radiated back from the poles. The energy budget, which is the balance between the amount of heat coming to the Earth from the sun and the amount of heat outgoing from the Earth into space. The difference between the two determines the planet's temperature and climate. The large amount of heat radiated from the Arctic and Antarctic is emitted as far infrared radiation. Far infrared radiation is in the wavelength of 3 mm to 1000 mm. And currently there is no way to measure this type of energy. Means this type of energy means far infrared radiation energy. As a result, there is a gap in knowledge about the planet's energy budget. So, to fill this gap in knowledge, these CubeSats are being launched. The plan is to launch two. For the southern pole, it has been launched. For the northern pole, it will be launched in the time to come. About PREFIRE, each of the PREFIRE satellites is a 6U cube satellite, means 6 unit of CubeSats are there. Nearly 120 centimeter in width and 90 centimeter in height. When including this solar panels which will be mounted on it, which will supply it energy. So, including that, this is going to be the length and width of that particular satellite. The two satellites will be placed in a near polar orbit. Near polar orbit is type of a low Earth orbit, which is 525 kilometers from the Earth's surface. Its two CubeSats can study far infrared radiation from the Earth's core. The data collected by them would help scientists better understand how the heat budget will be happening. Each of the PREFIRE cube satellite is equipped with thermal infrared spectrometer, known as TIRS, thermal infrared spectrometer, measure the amount of infrared and far infrared radiation from the Arctic and Antarctic. They will also measure the amount of far infrared radiation trapped in or trapped by atmospheric water vapor and clouds. Now, these infrared radiations being emitted can be trapped by water vapor or clouds. Water vapor acts like a greenhouse gas. So this will also help us identify that how much heat is trapped by them and how they are acting. Clouds and water vapor are acting as greenhouse gases or creating this climate change or global warming over here. So this will also be the purpose. Solely, I would say, to sum up, in the end, the purpose is heat being emitted from the poles, how much it is to check. Next is the Global Pandemic Treaty. Health officials from 194 countries have been discussing this treaty since the past 2 years. And, you know, the need arose when, COVID came and WHO realized that there is no global treaty, legally binding treaty. And hence, framing a response to such kind of pandemic, multiple difficulties were felt. Actually, it was a global pandemic. There are rules presently for diseases which are less in spread. We call them epidemics. The WHO tried to use those rules as far as it could, but you know, there needs to be a global pandemic treaty which is going to guide WHO in its response to such kind of pandemics in the future. Pandemics can definitely occur or happen in the future. So there's a meeting going on May 27 to June 1, and this meeting's agenda is an update to the existing health rules on outbreaks. Those are, international health rules for epidemics, and a new legally binding treaty to shore up the world's defense against future pathogens after COVID-19 pandemic has come. Why such a treaty is needed? First of all, there is international health regulations, IHR, which is already binding rules, but these are rules for epidemics. They have potential to obligations where public health events have the potential to cross national borders. These include advising WHO immediately of a health emergency and measures on trade and travel. It was adopted after 2002-3 SARS outbreak. These regulations are still seen as functional for regional epidemics, not pandemics, such as Ebola, but inadequate for a global pandemic. So we need for a global pandemic. That is why such a treaty is needed. Much of the impetus for a separate treaty comes from the desire to address the COVID era shortcomings. There were multiple COVID era shortcomings. There was this vaccine apartheid, in which there was discrimination against the poorer countries, and it was denounced repeatedly by Tedros. Tedros was that person who was heading WHO, and ensuring faster, more transparent information sharing and cooperation. So all these challenges, were being faced in or during COVID. What types of provisions are expected? Now, updates to the IHR rules include a new alert system for communicating with WHO. Communication should be timely. Currently, WHO has only one level of emergency, a public health emergency of international concern. Whereas the new system envisages an intermediary stage called an early action alert. Why to go to the last level and then declare an emergency? There should be an intermediary stage also where you can declare. People can become alert. Negotiators are also considering a pandemic emergency for the most serious public health threats, addressing a gap in its current system because WHO does not use the term pandemic at all. So, if this will happen, pandemic emergency, which is the most serious or severe threat, then this gap of pandemic not being present will also be addressed. Other revisions could include attempts to bolster states' obligations. States' obligations, basically, when the states have to communicate, the countries have to communicate to WHO. The present language is that they may communicate, but this has to be changed to they should communicate. It should be more binding on the states. And one of the most important and fiercely debated sections of the treaty, Article 12, it envisages reserving around 20% of the tests, treatments, and vaccines for WHO to distribute to poorer countries. So that vaccine apartheid which happened, that will not happen. But this is one of the most important and fiercely debated clause because the developed world is not ready for this. The roadblocks, major rifts between wealthy and poorer countries position. This is almost there in every negotiations nowadays. Now, besides sharing of drugs and vaccines, one of the most contested aspects is financing. Financing means whether to set up a dedicated fund for pandemic or draw from existing sources such as World Bank's $1 billion pandemic fund. This is one major clause which is being debated whether we should have a separate dedicated fund or we should use these funds. Negotiations have sometimes dragged on late into night, getting stuck on technicalities of this treaty. Another factor constraining negotiators had been political pressure over the treaty, particularly by right wing groups and politicians who say that it threatens sovereignty, which the WHO strongly denies. Now, these rightists are hardcore nationalists, and if in such a situation WHO tries to overpower the medical systems of the countries, they feel that it is a big question on their sovereignty. So they are opposing, the rightists are opposing in this manner. So this is basically the provisions of the treaty. So next is Palestine's UN membership. You know, the United Nations Security Council has deferred membership for Palestine. Basically, USA being the lone country who vetoed this, I would say, resolution. But United Nations General Assembly, showing a symbolic gesture, has passed a resolution with 142 member countries out of 193 voting in favor of Palestine being a full-time member of United Nations. India being one of those 142 countries. That has to be noted. Now, UNSC rejecting it, UNGA passing it, will this make Palestine a permanent member of United Nations? Sadly, no. The procedure is that it has to be passed by United Nations Security Council by consensus, means no or none of the permanent five members, that is USA, UK, France, China, and Russia, vetoing it. And then this resolution has to become or has to be tabled in the United Nations General Assembly. United Nations General Assembly has to pass it by two-third majority. Then only a new member become or gets inducted into the United Nations. This is the procedure. However, in the present example, United Nations Security Council, USA vetoed it, but as a symbolic gesture, United Nations General Assembly passed that. This, technically speaking, will not make Palestine a permanent member. But yes, it can exert pressure on United Nations Security Council, particularly USA, to change its stance because most of the countries are wanting it in United Nations General Assembly. So this Israel's war on Gaza has raised multiple questions, ethical, political, and diplomatic. And one such diplomatic question is whether, you know, Palestine should be a permanent member of United Nations or not. Where and why is the quest struck? It is struck in United Nations Security Council, basically due to US mainly. What reason did USA give? It clearly said that membership of Palestine for United Nations should be followed by a resolution or a solution to the ongoing problem. Means first there will be a solution, then permanent membership of United Nations will be given to Palestine. Before a solution into picture, if we give permanent membership to Palestine, that is going to further complicate the situation. So first the solution, then the membership. This is what USA says. So this is one such thing. Now, is this the first time Palestine is requesting membership? No, this is not the first time. In 2011 too, this kind of request had been there. What happened this year? In United Nations Security Council, in April, the resolution was tabled, but lone veto cast by US, giving the reasons that first a solution to the problem, then membership. Then on May 10th, United Nations General Assembly stepped in to voice support for Palestinian, and UNGA overwhelmingly adopted a resolution. It also urged UNSC to favorably consider Palestine's request. So this is kind of moral pressuring of the United Nations Security Council by UNGA by passing this resolution. Criteria and procedure. Criteria is simple. The country should be peace loving and should be able to carry out obligations of the United Nations Charter. This is the criteria. But the procedure, as I mentioned, is difficult. First, UNSC, no veto by P5, then UNGA, two-third majority. In this scenario, membership will be granted. But yes, P5's dominance is here. If even one of the P5 countries will not want any country to become a member, they cannot become a member. And in this case, USA is that one country which is blocking Palestine's membership. What has been India's approach? India has supported the resolution passed in United Nations General Assembly in May 2024. India was one among 142 members. India opined that membership status would enhance the prospect of two-state solution. Two-state solution means in that region, two countries can be formed, Israel and Palestine, and that was also as per the United Nations plan of 1947 for Israel and Palestine. But that two-state solution at that time got destroyed or got diluted because of the wars after that. Notably, India's position on the membership question is now entirely in line with the approach articulated during the Nehruvian era. Actually, in that era also and after that also, we have never blocked or we have always supported membership for any country. We've supported membership for countries like Pakistan in 1947. We have supported membership for countries like People's Republic of China in 1971. And both of these countries are our enemies right now. But still, and we had certain problems with China and Pakistan then also, but still we supported their membership because we believe that United Nations is truly a global organization. Now coming to the MCQs, consider the following statements and mark the correct one. CubeSats are smaller than Rubik's Cube. CubeSats can be used for space research. Which of these are correct? Second is assertion and reasoning. Assertion statement is NASA's PREFIRE mission aims to study heat released from the poles. Reasoning, there is a knowledge gap in this domain. Third, consider the statements and mark the correct ones. The WHO has a global pandemic treaty in place since 1998. This treaty allows equitable distribution of resources during and post-pandemic period. So, which among these is correct? Consider the following assertion and reasoning. Another question of assertion and reasoning. See it very carefully. Assertion statement is Palestine is set to become the newest member of United Nations. Reasoning is a resolution for granting membership to Palestine was passed by UNGA by more than two-third majority. That is why it is become wanting to, or it will become the newest member. This is the reasoning. Now both A and R are true and R is the correct explanation of A. Both A and R are true, but R is not the correct explanation of A. A is true, R is false, A is false, R is true. So likewise, you have to answer. And the last question, Consider the statements and mark the correct one. India voted for full membership of United Nations of Pakistan in 1947, and India voted against full membership of UN for Palestine in 2024. Only one, only two, both one and two, neither one nor two. So answer these questions in the comment section. You will be getting the answers over there as well. And with this, we've come to an end of today's session. I will be meeting you tomorrow now with more such informative news pieces. Till then, you guys very well know what to do. Keep studying, keep reading, keep writing, and most importantly, keep revising. Namaste. Jai Hind.